Have you ever wondered about the history of electric chairs and death penalties that are still controversial today? Hello, my name is Faith Robinson, and I'm going to be talking about the most disturbing ways that dehumanize the individual, human torture. The reason I can talk about this is because I've done extensive research on this topic and I've done reports similar to it as well. Firstly, I'm going to be talking about the origins of human torture. Secondly, I'm going to be talking about the different torture methods and devices that were used. And lastly, I'm going to be talking about the forms of these torture methods that we see today. Hopefully, by the end of this speech, you'll be more informed about this cruel topic of human torture devices, and you'll be well informed to fight against the injustice that are practiced today. Firstly, let's talk about the origins of torture. The word torture literally comes from the French word torture, which means to twist. Torture is widely known as inflicting pain upon the individuals to get answers from them, or simply for people's enjoyment. Torture was first documented in the early 21 BC by the Code of Hammurabi and was used to justify torture and say that it was the will of God. The nobility were responsible for inflicting on this divine authority and would interpret the will of God himself, according to Thorium. In the 16th and 17th centuries, there were limitations on torture, which were strictly for people who were charged with crimes. But we know, throughout history, that there are people tend to abuse their powers and tend to torture people for small petty crimes that led to big capital punishments. During the age of the Renaissance, the Treaty of Crime and Punishment in 1764 marked the beginning of modern law. Servicii Borracha fought for public trials and opposition to torture that led to death because it deprived a person of their human right to live. The ways that these people were tortured are horrific, which leads me to my second point of what types of methods and devices that were used to torture these innocent individuals. I categorize these into two categories: physically and psychologically. These were the two methods used to torture someone. Psychological torture is the most common form of torture today and the most damaging in the long run. According to Orita, all types of torture leads to psychological pain and suffering because it's the most notable form of torture. One way that people are tortured psychologically is threats to their well-being or family. When someone is told that they're going to be harmed or their family, they tend to enroll a big mental health role on that. Many people will give in and give up information that is wanted out of fear that their family will suffer for their mistakes or love. Another way that people are tortured psychologically are food and water deprivation. Taking away someone's source of survival will make them hopeless and will end up damaging them in the long run. Another way that someone is tortured psychologically is through pills or drugs. Another used method that is highly used today, and people will be drugged up to the point of death, which is mentally disturbing for the individual. Now, let's talk about physical torture. One way that people were physically tortured is through rat torture. The individual was placed a rat on their belly with a cage surrounding, and the cage would be heated up until the rat would gore through the individual's stomach. He would lay and slowly die. It would take about an hour for them to die. Another way that people were tortured physically was by boiling. There's no fancy word for it. It sounds exactly what it is: boiling someone alive. This was saved for the selfish. And this is when an individual is stripped of their clothes and burnt alive with any liquid possible. The last method of physical torturing is scavenging. This torture method is the most skin crawling of them all, because the individual was covered in milk and honey, as well fed milk and honey until they threw up and had diarrhea all over themselves. This would cause insects, bugs, animals therefore eat the individual alive as they sat out in the sun or wherever they were placed. Psychological and physical torture has been a part of human culture since the beginning of time and still influences the way that government performs justice for the people. This brings me to my final point, which is about torture methods that are used today in a legalized way. Many countries claim that torture is unconstitutional and is banned for the most part, but there's still legalized torture. 9 states have the use of death by electric chair as a method of execution, which is commonly seen as unjust and punishment due to the, according to Death Penalty Information Center. Forms of torture that are used today is degradation, isolation, and lynching. Degradation is a form of psychological torture that is used today. Majorities are put down because of their race, skin color, or religion, and this could damage an individual for generations to come. Isolation is another form of psychological torture today. An example of this would be that in prisons they have solitary confinement, where an individual is locked up for 23 hours of the day and only given necessities and bathroom breaks, which can play a big part on the person's mental health. Lastly, lynching is a form of physical torture not commonly used but is controversial. Slaves were lynched, and also people are lynched today. They say that the controversial chokehold by law enforcement had led to many deaths in recent years. I can't breathe is a commonly used term that has been driven by movements such as Black Lives Matter movement to protect against torture methods used by law enforcement. To sum this all up, human torture has been a controversial topic for decades due to harsh conditions associated with that led to the death of many innocent individuals and the stripping of one's identity for so-called judgment. Now that you are well informed on human torture methods and devices throughout history, will you be daring to stand up for injustices methods that are used today? Thank you.